Hey there, just a quick reminder, if you have a story you'd like to hear featured on the channel, go to mariesfield.com and send it my way. And of course, thank you. Growing up in the 90s, trick-or-treating was a sacred ritual for us kids in our small suburban town. We didn't have urban legends about ghosts, goblins, or monsters. We were the type that would listen to the whispers about which houses in the area gave out the full-sized candy bars. There was one house at the end of the street that Tommy claimed was haunted by demons. He claimed he made without evidence or even reason. Not really relevant, but it kind of tells you who we were as kids. Back in 97 was the year that this happened, and this was a Halloween that was more than terrifying for my group of friends. That year was a cold year for trick-or-treating. It was a chilly evening with a slight mist that was threatening our night with rain, and the wind was starting to act like we were going to get storms. We were marching house to house with our pillowcases, starting to get heavy. Our pack was 4 kids, Tommy, Lily, and her younger brother Jordan. Most of us were 12, minus Jordan being 9, and with how small our town was, we were pretty much told to walk the neighborhoods and get the candy and get back. We weren't supervised. None of the kids in town here were. We'd been through most of the normal route and decided that we were going to head toward a neighborhood that was a bit out of the way. A neighborhood that we normally didn't go through and weren't supposed to go through. This was a bit of a different area of our small town. The houses were a bit further apart, and there were a lot more trees that lined the properties. In my mind, that meant that they were likely to give away more candy, because there were fewer people, right? It made sense at the time, to me at least. We went to a couple of the first few houses and had decent hauls. Nothing crazy, but we weren't willing to give up. We kept on down the road until we got to a house that caused us to hesitate. The house was something else. Old, slightly falling apart, and the entire yard was littered with animal statues. When I say it was littered, I mean there was no more than 2 or 3 feet of the yard that didn't have a statue in it. Owls, cats, dogs, lions, gnomes, just a bunch of random and slightly creepy statues in all directions, all turned to face the walkway from the street to the door. We all just stood there looking at the house, waiting for anyone else to go up to the house. Basically, no one moving until someone else moved. Suddenly, Tommy says something stupid like, "I think it's a witch that lives there." I immediately scoffed when he said that, like, full on, pfft. I told him that was dumb because there was no such thing as witches, that it was probably just some old lady that liked animals. I rolled my eyes and decided that I would be the one to knock on the door and get the candy, and that my lame friends could stay behind. I stepped down the walkway toward the door, and I will mention that as I was walking toward the door, it felt a bit oppressive. I felt the eyes of those statues on me. It felt like they were all staring at me with malicious intent and were going to jump at literally any moment. Of course, none of them did, but it was the feeling that seemed to overwhelm me. I got to the door and I knocked since there didn't look like there was a doorbell. I honestly didn't know if anyone was even going to answer. But after about 2 minutes, there was a loud creaking sound that started in front of me. The door slowly opened in a manner that can only be described as unsettling. And on the other side of the door was an older woman. I won't get insulting with my description. I will just say that she looked a bit ghastly. She was very pale, had large eyes that just seemed too big for her skull, and was dressed in some old nightgown. As soon as she saw me, she shifted to a large smile, and she looked excited. "Ah, trick-or-treater, how delightful." And she just sort of stood there for a moment as we stared at each other awkwardly. I was a bit caught off guard by her sudden excitement, considering the eerie vibe of the house. I tried to maintain my composure and broke the silence by saying, trick or treat? She smiled again and commented, "You're the first person to come to the house tonight. I haven't had any other kids come up to get their treats." I again just stood there like, "Okay, that's cool. Can I get my candy, please?" Obviously, I didn't say that. I just grinned and nodded slightly in agreement. She looked over to my group of friends that were standing at the end of her walking path, and then back to me and laughed. "Oh, I see. You're the brave one, huh?" I once again nodded and said, "Yeah, I guess." Then it got creepy. She stepped forward slightly and said, "Why don't you come inside? I have some special treats just in the kitchen." Despite my initial bravado about approaching the house, I was starting to regret my decision, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Oh, no thank you, ma'am. I think I should get going, sorry." But as I said that, her hand shot out and she gripped my wrist like a vice grip. No, it's cold out there. Come inside and warm up." I felt as she started to pull me toward the house with what felt like inhuman strength. I tried to pull my arm away from her and was screaming, "Help!" I felt so small in that moment, lost in this creepy moment with this old woman trying to drag me into her house. At this point, Jordan, Lily's younger brother, became the brave one of the group. He started shouting, "Hey, leave him alone!" followed by the sound of candy smacking into the side of the house in the porch. The distraction was enough for her to briefly loosen her grip, and I was able to pull away. I turned and bolted, sprinting back toward my friends. As we took off down the road, we could hear this old woman laughing like a maniac and saying that she would find us. We didn't stop running for several blocks. Our breathing was ragged, and we were all running on pure adrenaline. As soon as we stopped, Tommy looked at me with a pale face. "Dude, I was joking about there being a witch living there. I didn't think they'd actually try to drag you inside." When he said this, we all kind of chuckled like, "Yeah, good call on that one, Tommy." Once we all caught our breath, we decided to just head back home, that we'd gotten enough candy, and that the excitement for the night was more than enough for the whole year. When we got back to Tommy's house, we sorted through our candy, did some trades before we all went our separate ways to get home. We never told our parents, and I think that was because we knew we would get in trouble for going that far from home. So we just kept it as a lesson amongst our group. That was the last year that we all went trick-or-treating too. When we hit our teen years, it just didn't seem as interesting. Obviously, Jordan had a couple years left before he was done, but he just went with his dad instead of going with Lily. About a year or so later, that house was torn down and the statues all disappeared. I would guess that the creepy old woman passed away at some point, or maybe she moved away. This happened in 2018, Halloween night. I was taking my 2 kids out trick-or-treating, and it was going to be the first year my youngest actually went with us. Before then, He just stayed with my mom while I took my oldest, but now, at the ages of 6 and 4, they were both going and they were both really excited about it. Since my youngest didn't really care what costume he was wearing, as long as he got one, I decided to do the cheesy mom thing and get matching costumes. What I didn't expect was my oldest wanting to do it with us, so we went with Cat in the Hat, and my boys were Thing 1 and Thing 2. We were really cute, and my youngest seemed to love the idea of my hat and whiskers. We started at my mom's place so she could see us and get pictures looking our best, and then we walked her neighborhood first. She lived in a nice area, and the majority of the people were retirees, so they loved seeing kids and handing out lots of candy. We had been doing well, and we were all in good spirits, my youngest not showing any signs of slowing down. He was always trying to be in front of us, and adamant about trying to ring the doorbell before we got to it. This one particular house was no different. There were 2 carved pumpkins resting in the grass, lining the sidewalk, and the porch light was on, our typical sign that we could try knocking. We approached the door, and after my youngest, Reuben, rang the bell, we stepped back and waited as they excitedly held out their bag. After the normal allotted time that you would wait, no one came to the door. Reuben was ready to press the button again, so I had to explain to him that if they didn't answer, you walked away. This all took place probably within the span of just a few minutes. So, after explaining this, I told them it was time to go and started ushering them to the gate. As we started walking out, I could hear a door being unlocked, like the loud clunking sound of a deadbolt, and turned around to see the door being opened. Reuben noticed too, and immediately went back to the door, holding out his bag again. But the moment the door creaked open, I was hit with a sight that would never leave my conscience. It was a frail-looking woman, and her appearance was nothing short of alarming. She had on this raggedy old tank top. You could tell it was once white, now a very off-white. There was a hole near the side and a dark brown or red-colored stain towards the unraveling hem. Her bottom attire looked like just a pair of men's boxers, also very dirty and old-looking. As bad as this is going to sound, her face just added to the unsettling feeling. Her eyes were sunken in, one of them bloodshot as if something happened to her, but her eyes remained wide open and constantly moving like she was looking for something or someone. Her hair was a tangled mess, bunched up and resting on her shoulder like it was once in a bun. I felt an immediate wave of unease wash over me as I rested my hands on my kid's shoulders. She seemed to notice this, which made me instantly feel bad for reacting the way I did. Maybe she was just ill or something and we disturbed her. I smiled politely at her as my kids said trick or treat and waited for candy. After staring at us, she looked over us, scanning the area as if trying to find someone. She then stepped back into her home and grabbed something from behind the door and returned with a transparent bowl full of loose M&Ms. She then took handfuls of them and threw them in my kids' bags. I don't mean packages of them either. I mean opened, poured into a bowl that you would keep and eat for yourself, but just handfuls of it is now tossed into their bags. I was already distracted enough by that and her appearance, so I was taken aback when she started talking to me. But not because she was striking up a friendly conversation and commenting on our costumes. It was pleading. "Help me." she said in a trembling whisper. I didn't know how to respond or even if I heard her correctly, so I just responded with a, pardon me? She persisted, now whispering a bit louder as her eyes remained wide open and staring at me. Help me, please. He won't let me leave. Help me. I was still in shock, racing to comprehend the situation. Was this real? Did she really need help? Was this some kind of ruse? Or maybe even a really bad prank? If so, I couldn't fathom anyone finding this kind of scare amusing. I had young children with me, and the way Ruben backed up into me told me he was already feeling uncomfortable. I tried to remain calm and speak in a controlled tone to not give away I was either falling for a prank or scared. Are you okay? I can call the cops for you. Her eyes softened some, and she let out what I can only describe as a small whimper. She looked so sad as she slowly shut the door in our faces. I never saw or heard another person, even though she mentioned a he. But either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. People wouldn't joke about something like that, right? Or at least wouldn't end the interaction like that. So with this heavy on my mind, I took my kids out of the yard, walked down to the front of the house next door, and called the police. I tried to keep my kids distracted by asking them questions and checking out all the goods they've gotten while we waited for the police. When they did arrive, I explained everything I saw and heard, and they asked if I would stay by to confirm who came to the door, and I agreed. We stood behind one of the cops as they approached the door and knocked. But when she answered, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the same woman I had just met less than 20 minutes ago, but she looked completely different. Her hair was now pinned back, but the ends were blunt, like it was obviously just cut. She was wearing a long black dress and appeared to have applied makeup. I couldn't see the dark circles around her eyes, and she was obviously wearing dark lipstick. She stood there smiling at the police, talking with her hands and even laughing. My heart sank as I watched her offer the officers a candy bar, not some loose M&Ms from a bowl. After a few minutes, the officers returned to us, explained that the woman did confirm the incident was a prank. She claimed to live alone and assured them that she was perfectly fine. I couldn't help but feel skeptical. If it was all a prank, why had she changed her clothes? Why not simply say, yeah, it was a joke, especially to the person you're trying to prank? That same person that said they were going to call the police. And there's no way she didn't see me standing there. Why not apologize to me? And even more perplexing, why would she cut her hair? That's not something you can undo, so what was the purpose of it? I shared my doubts with the officers, trying to emphasize the gravity of the situation and how sincere her pleas were. What if she was in genuine danger? What if she had to change because the person she spoke of noticed her? However, they told me they would look into it further, assuring me they would reach out if they needed any more information. We finished our night shortly after that, the exhaustion catching up to us after the whole event. And as days turned into weeks, I never got a call or update from the police. My mom said she never heard or saw anything in the week or two that followed. She said she even drove by the house a few times, and there was never any motion going on out there. I want to believe it was a prank, but the fact that she's never even seen outside only cements my thoughts that someone doesn't want her to be seen. I've even disturbingly looked over obituaries and missing persons reports to see if maybe I could spot her, but there was nothing. Of course, we have gone trick-or-treating since that year, including that same neighborhood, as my mother still lives in the same place. However, since then, the porch light has been off, so we haven't even tried approaching the door. I just can't help but think about it. I often think about her, especially as Halloween approaches. I hope it was a terrible prank that she was terrible at, but I still fear that something sinister was happening and her one chance she took failed, and that she could still be in trouble. I have a short but honestly terrifying story that happened to me about 15 years ago on Halloween night. For some background, I lived in a fairly decent little town outside of a major city. It's more of a growing suburb than anything, and it's mostly pretty quiet. At the time of this story, I was 28, and my son was just turning 8. So he was at that age where he still needed my help with a lot of things, but he was wanting to be more independent, so I was doing my best to not smother him, but was still doing what I could to make sure he was doing things right and didn't need help. I raised him myself without his father, so it was tough, but it's part of being a parent. On this particular Halloween, he wanted to go trick-or-treating, and I, of course, was going to go with him. But he also didn't want me hovering over him. He was, in his words, big enough to go to the door alone and knock. It was also rather cold and wet that year, so he and I made a compromise. I would drive the car to each road and direct him which houses to go to, and would watch him from the car, and he would get to do it all himself unless he physically needed help. I would drive him to each street, and we would do this until he got tired or it got too late. For most of the night, things went smoothly. He was pretty happy to be walking between the houses on his own. I was happy that I was able to watch him and not upset him. He would go to the houses, say trick or treat, and if they would ask where his parents were, he would tell them his mom was watching him from the car because he didn't need help. Most of the older people would laugh at this comment. Some of the younger ones, I think, had an issue with it, but we were both happy, so whatever. Every time he would get in the car, he would show me his bag and what they gave him, and would tell me that he was having a lot of fun, so it was a great night. However, on one street, things went from really fun to actually quite horrifying. We had pulled up on the street, and everything looked normal. A few of the houses were dark, and there weren't many trick-or-treaters, but I figured that was more because of the time than anything. It was getting late. There were a few houses with their lights on, so I told him to go to the 3 houses and come back to the car, and we would make a game plan from there. He said okay, hopped out of the car, and started to the first house. As soon as I watched him go to the first house and then make his way to the second, I felt something cold hit the side of my head. I started to look over toward whatever it was, but it clicked pretty fast. There was a guy dressed in all black, holding a gun to the side of my head, and he very quickly told me to get out of the car and not make a scene. I was obviously panicking. My son was at one of the houses, and he was going to come back to the car soon, so I wasn't going to do anything to make this guy want to pull the trigger. I told him okay, that I would do what he was asking, and opened the door and stepped out. As soon as my feet hit the pavement, he shoved me off to the side and jumped into the car and then took off down the road going way too fast. Thankfully, there weren't many people on this road at the time because with how fast he was going, he wouldn't have been able to stop if a child had walked out into the road. I stood up, still freaking out, and I immediately ran over to the house that my son was at. He was still getting candy from them when I walked up, and the old man at the door looked up and smiled, asking if I was his mother. I said I was, and I think that he realized something was wrong right away based on my tone. I started to tell him what had just happened, and as soon as I said it, I pretty much started bawling. He told me to come inside, so the two of us stepped in, and he said that he would call the police. His wife came over and asked what happened, and he told her, and honestly, the whole thing was such a terrifying and embarrassing mess. Here I was with my 8-year-old son in some random old couple's house, crying my eyes out because some rando had just carjacked me. Of course, my brain was sifting through those anxious thoughts about how it could have gone if my son was in the car at the time, how it would have traumatized him and all of that. They called the cops, and the old lady got some water for myself and my son, and we sat there while she held a pretty nice conversation with him. She actually gave him the rest of the candy, and they shut off their light, and then she showed him how to crochet or knit, I really don't remember. He was entertained, and thankfully didn't really understand the whole situation beyond something bad had happened. When the cops got there, I gave them all the information I had on the guy. I didn't really see his face, but I saw the logo on his jacket, and I gave them all the information on my car. After they left, the old man said that he would take the two of us home. Thankfully, I had a spare key hidden in the front yard, so I could at least get into the house. The whole time, I was apologizing to the man for the inconvenience, and he just told me that he was happy to help, and sorry that the whole thing happened. After we got home, my son wanted to stay up and watch scary movies, and as much as I wanted to tell him no because it was late, I just said screw it and let him enjoy the night. I ended up falling asleep on the couch while he was watching some creepy movie, and the next morning, when I woke up, he was passed out on the floor with candy wrappers everywhere. I ended up calling him out of school that next day and called out of work so we could just hang out together at the house, since I knew he wasn't going to be up to going to school and I wasn't in the right mindset to go to work. To wrap this up, they did find my car after a few days, but never found the guy. The car was abandoned on the side of the highway after he had blown a tire, and one of the wheels was pretty messed up. But thankfully, there wasn't any damage that couldn't be repaired. It was expensive, sure, but thankfully, my parents were able to help me. I can't imagine how stressful it would have been if they couldn't have. When he got a bit older, I did finally explain to him what happened, mostly because I've always tried to be open with him. He didn't really remember that night, so at least I know he wasn't traumatized by the whole thing. For me, however, that was the most terrifying Halloween I had ever had, and it's probably the scariest thing to happen to me personally. We did go trick-or-treating for a couple years after that, but we stuck to our block. So, to everyone out there, stay diligent and make sure that you don't let anyone sneak up on you like I did. Halloween is supposed to be a fun night, so make sure you're staying safe out there so everyone can enjoy the holidays' festivities. This happened back whenever I was 7 years old, and at the time, it was the creepiest thing that I had ever experienced. I admit that it was kind of a nothing really happened event, and of course, I didn't have much experience being 7 years old, and scarier things have happened further into my life. But this was seriously terrifying at the time. It was Halloween, which is obviously by the fact that we were all trick-or-treating at the time. We had a local park that was owned by a church, and they liked to do this big Halloween event that was kind of like a trunk-or-treat kind of thing. But it was almost like a little Halloween carnival. My dad agreed to take myself and my little sister, and I was over the moon. I was a little girl that loved everything spooky. Finally going to what I thought was going to be the pinnacle of all Halloween events, even though it was watered down and hosted by a church. I was obviously amped and thought it was going to be an amazing night. My dad was busy keeping an eye on my little sister, so at one point, I had kind of wandered off to check out this haunted maze that they'd set up. I thought I was old enough to handle it. I yelled to my dad that I was going to go through the maze and ignored when he told me to wait for him and Lacey, my sister, who was 3 at the time. I was so engrossed that I didn't think anything of it and just assumed he was right behind me. I entered into the maze and made quick work of it. It was creepy, but it was super quick to get through. I pop out the other side and I'm amped because they gave me this caramel apple as a prize for getting through. I immediately unwrapped it and bit into it, then looked around for my dad and sister, only to not see either of them. The crowd looked a bit thinner than I remembered, but neither of them were there. I walked around the side of the maze and out to the front, the main area of the festival, thinking that they would be there waiting. But still, I didn't see them. I was just kind of standing there like a lost puppy, looking around thinking, where did they go? After a few moments, I walked over toward the entrance, thinking that if they were looking for me, they would have me come to the front, right? They would go somewhere that I could be seen and was a common checkpoint. After a few moments of standing at the front, I saw this person wearing a mask standing off to the side, just kind of staring at me. He was wearing one of those exaggerated old person face masks, the kind that are really wrinkly and flabby. At first, I just saw him standing there, and I didn't think anything of it, just a person standing off to the side in a creepy mask. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I noticed that he hadn't turned away from me or walked anywhere else, and I was hitting a point of getting a bit worried by it because it was creepy. I knew that something was off at this point. My heart was starting to speed up, and I could feel myself starting to cry. Right about then is when this creepy man in the mask started to walk toward me, and I choked as I thought, this guy is going to kill me. Again, I was 7, so that was just the random idea implanted in my little brain by the horror movies I've seen. I just stood there watching this creepy person walking toward me, and as he did, I watched as he reached his hand into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a dog leash or a leather rope of some sort. I remember starting to shake as he slowly crept toward me with this rope in his hand. Thankfully, at the point where he hit the halfway point between us, my dad walked up to me and asked me where I'd been. I looked up at him with teary eyes and I couldn't speak, but I just burst into tears at that point. He picked me up and told me it would be okay, but that I needed to stay by him for the rest of the night so he didn't lose me again. I remember looking back to see if I could find the creepy man, but he was gone. What wasn't gone, though, was his mask. It was on the ground as if he'd taken it off and tossed it before walking away. I have literally no idea what his intentions were. The rope or leash or whatever it was enough to scare the hell out of a 7-year-old me. But the fact that he left the mask tells me, at least now, that he didn't want me to be able to point him out to my dad. I absolutely assume that this man had ill intent, but thankfully, my dad showed up just in time. Like I mentioned, I know that this was kind of a nothing really happened story, but it was still terrifying to me at that time. So that, my friends, was our yearly collection of Halloween stories. Had to throw some of those in here for the end of the month at least. So we've got some Halloween in general with the trunk or treating and trick or treating in general. So there's that. Thankfully, as I was making this, I was trying to think if there was any eventful things that happened to us while we were trick or treating, and thankfully, no. I think the closest thing to just Halloween in general was when my dad took us to a haunted house, and it wasn't like a big crazy one. It was a local thing, but we still went. And at one point in time, something fell, or maybe somebody jumped out at us. I don't remember what happened, but I had a hold of my dad because I was already scared of the place. And when that happened, I jumped or something and got attached, I wasn't attached to my dad anymore. And then I was reaching out and I found somebody and I grabbed their hand, and I was a kid, didn't really pay any attention that, hey, they're not holding your hand back or anything. And I tugged on the hand and they didn't move. And then the lights flashed on, like the flare lights or whatever they're called. And it was a fake person, like a mannequin. And he had like a fake axe or whatever in his chest. And I was holding the hand, and that freaked me out. Because I thought it was my dad. But I didn't like haunted houses after that. Not really my thing. I don't like the idea of being chased. They're cool. I wish I liked them. Could get over that. But yeah, not my thing. Cool to look at though. So there's that. I think that's probably the scariest thing that's happened to me for Halloween. So hopefully you guys haven't had anything actually scary like that happen. Hopefully maybe you found a good haunted house though that you had a better experience at. Or just a better Halloween. If you do, I'd love to hear about it. Whether that's story or just something that happened, feel free to let me know. So I'm going to stop talking about myself now. And if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. And then lastly, you can leave a comment at the end letting me know what your thoughts were on the video. Let me know about your Halloween, if you're doing anything, if you've done anything fun in the past. Tell me your favorite costume, if you ever dressed up. I'd love to hear it. And with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic week, a wonderful rest of your day, and a safe Halloween. And until next time, take care.